Hi everyone and welcome to my new video. In this video we are going to flip through my old bullet journals so you can see how I first got started with bullet journaling and also how my style has changed over the last years. Hopefully this video will give you some inspiration or new ideas whether you are a bullet journal newbie or someone who has been bullet journaling for some time already. Let's start with my first ever bullet journal, which was this very aesthetic and elegant Cars notebook. I wanted to give bullet journaling a try first without buying an expensive notebook because I wasn't sure if I would enjoy it or be able to keep up with it. I used supplies that I already had at home, like colored pencils and one black fine liner, and I think this first cover page turned out pretty cute. By the way, this cover page is from November 2017. I think this was a recreation of something that I saw on Pinterest, so I don't take any credits of these first pages. The paper in this notebook was very thin, so the markers I used ended up bleeding through the paper, as you can see. At the time I was studying at university and had a lot of different assignments and deadlines, so I kept the setup super simple and did just a monthly spread and weeklies, which helped me remember my university stuff. For December I did this simple Christmas themed cover page, and I think I tried to achieve a faux calligraphy look with the title, but didn't know which strokes I should make thicker as I knew nothing about calligraphy yet. This was basically the cursive handwriting I learned in school, so it looks quite different compared to my lettering nowadays. By the way, I have posted a lettering tutorial which I will link in the description box, so check that out if you want to know my tips and how to get started on that. Anyway, I experimented a little bit more with the spreads this time and tried a habit tracker for the first time, and I actually really ended up liking it as it motivated me to keep my apartment clean, and it was also a good way for me to track how often I practiced playing different instruments for my minor studies in music education. If you are someone who wants to start bullet journaling, I would highly recommend keeping things nice and simple so you don't get overwhelmed. Your bullet journal doesn't have to be very aesthetic or something that you see in social media, and if you have been watching my other videos, you know that my bullet journal looks quite different these days, and that's because I went through different phases with it and tried a lot of different things to find out what works the best for me. Anyway, after 2 months of using the Cars notebook, I really wanted to buy a notebook with dotted pages, and this Moleskine notebook was the only one I could find at a local bookstore. I didn't really end up liking this notebook because it had a very thin pages, so all my markers easily bled through the paper, and it had a lot of coasting too. I again recreated spreads I saw in Pinterest, and this was my first future log, and I actually still use this kind of layout as it works really well for me. And here's my first January cover page. I used a black fine liner for the header and 2 different kinds of fine liners for the snowflakes, so this was really quick and easy to set up. For some reason I made my monthly spreads sideways, which I nowadays find a little bit difficult because I have to turn the notebook around to use them. I decided to try a monthly mood tracker for the first time, and this layout was probably something I saw on Pinterest. At the time I only saw mood trackers that you had to color in, so that's what I did too. For my first weekly spreads I used this vertical layout, and I think it was inspired by Amanda Lee. I also tried daily logging, but that didn't really work for me because it was difficult to see the weekly overview, and a spread this simple didn't motivate me to use my journal. I've always loved drawing, but didn't do that a lot because I often had no ideas and starting a new art project felt quite difficult. Bullet journaling, however, was a fun way for me to practice my drawing skills, and for some reason it didn't feel as difficult. Maybe because I could just draw tiny little doodles instead of making a big art piece. Now we are looking at my February spreads, and as you can see, I mainly focused on making the date numbers decorative and kept the rest of the layout super simple. This was an easy way for me to make my bullet journal a bit more interesting to look at, so it would keep me motivated to use it. In March, I had just bought my first set of Pigma Micron fine liners, which I really wanted to use, so I drew some tulips on my cover page with them. I used a few different thicknesses to make the line work interesting and colored the tulips with colored pencils after that. I spent a little bit more time on the other spreads as well and decorated my monthly spreads with tulips too. I switched to a bigger calendar, which worked a lot better for me. And this was also the month when I started writing about some memories in my weekly spreads, which helped me to use my journal more, especially on the days when I didn't have as many things on my to-do list. In April, I decided to try out something new with my mood tracker and did these flowers for each day of the week so I can see if my mood is better during the weekends, for example. This mood tracker didn't end up working well for me as I didn't remember to color it in, as you can see. Here's my May cover page, and I remember really liking how the butterflies turned out. My lettering also got a little bit better as I was finally able to figure out which strokes I should make thicker to achieve the faux calligraphy look. I was really busy this month as I was finishing up my bachelor thesis and also started a new job for the summer, so the rest of the spreads were again really simple, and I also didn't use my trackers as much. I wanted to reward myself from the hard work that I did on my thesis, so I decided to buy my first Tombow dual brush pens. I didn't know how to use them yet because I had never owned any brush pens, so from this month on I started to learn hand lettering. It was very difficult, so I used these capital letters at first and added a little drop shadow to them to give more dimension. As you can see, my lettering didn't look so great at the beginning because my up and down strokes looked pretty much the same, and I also hadn't learned the calligraphy alphabet that I use nowadays. This was the first ever Dutch door I did, and I didn't really end up liking it as there was no point cutting a Dutch door this small, and I felt like I was wasting paper. I added some collections in the middle of my setup too, like a packing list and list of things that made me happy. Here you can see a little brain dump page for my July theme. I just doodled some ideas and tried out different color palettes to figure out what I like. I ended up making a cocktail theme and used pink and yellow for the colors. My lettering also started to look better as I had been practicing up and down strokes and also the letters themselves. Because me and my boyfriend often struggled with which movie we want to watch, I made this spread where I wrote down some movies and added a little number in each box so we can select randomly which movie we will watch next. For some reason we didn't end up using this, but I thought I would share it just in case that's something you want to try out. This month I experimented a little bit more with my weeklies and made them more colorful. I tried this layout which had events on the left side and a big to-do list on the right side, but this didn't work for me, so I went back to my go-to vertical layout where I had a little bit more room for daily journaling as well. I also did a spread where I wrote down some summer memories and highlights, and this is really fun to look at now as I can remember all the things I did during this summer. Here's my August 2018 cover page. I drew this forest illustration without looking at any reference photos, and I think it turned out really cute. My drawing style was a lot more sketchy and loose compared to what it's now, and I think it was because I used to draw more with pencils instead of using fine liners. Here's my first ever plant tracker spread, and this is really fun to look back on, especially now that I have a lot more plants. I really liked how this turned out at the time, but now I think I found a lot better way to track the watering schedule. During this time my style started slowly getting more decorative and I put a little bit more effort in my weekly spreads as well. I used the rest of the notebook for planning out my next themes, but I also wrote some random notes and tested my pens on the last pages to see which ones wouldn't have as much ghosting. Anyway, that's it for this notebook, and let's move on to my next one, which I started using in September 2018. This notebook had quite a lot of pages, so I used it for about a year and I really liked it as it had hardly any ghosting. The only con was that it had a smaller dot grid, which I didn't enjoy that much. I again kept the beginning pages very simple because setting up a new journal felt quite challenging. At this time I started doing my master's studies and wanted to keep track of the different courses I had to take, so I did a page where I wrote out all of them and also the dates when I had to sign up for the course. On the right side I made a simple tracker for the different assignments and deadlines, and this page was incredibly helpful because I could just flip back to it and see at a glance which things I needed to get done and when. I also tried making a cleaning tracker where I had a tracker for weekly and monthly cleaning tasks and also mark down things I need to get done maybe once or twice a year. This tracker didn't work for me though, as I forgot to fill it in, as you can see. Here's my September cover page and I still really like how it turned out. Hedgehogs are one of my favorite animals and I think they are really cute, so looking at this cover page makes me really happy. I think I used fine liners and some brush pens from Faber-Castell for the hedgehog and also some colored pencils so it wouldn't look too dark. I think my lettering also had improved a lot at this point. Here's my tracker spread, and as you can see I really tried making mood trackers work for me, but this again ended up looking half empty as I often forgot to fill it in. My weekly spreads are again pretty much the same as I really like this vertical layout. I also added a little study tracker on the bottom, but it didn't stop me from procrastinating. For October I did this mushroom theme, which I really liked at the time, but I started to notice that the colored pencils didn't look as vibrant as I would have wanted. That's probably because they weren't very good quality, as I had to press really hard to get more color. I kept my habit tracker the same as it worked really well for me, but like I said, I struggled a lot with my mood trackers. I decided to try out a different approach where I wrote about my mood of the day, so I can later color this in if I forget to do it right away. I guess this worked a little bit better for me because I remembered to fill most of it, but now looking back it's really funny that I didn't realize that the problem with the mood trackers was the coloring part, as I remembered to fill in the tracker when I was using only one black pen. Here's one of my all-time favorite weekly spreads, and I think the layout was inspired by something I had seen on Pinterest. This was my first time using this kind of layout where I had these rounded decorations around the date numbers, and I really liked that look. This didn't really fit the color scheme of my theme, but that didn't really matter as I wasn't doing super cohesive themes at this point anyway. Here's my cover page for November, and I think this month was a little turning point when it comes to my art style. I didn't use colored pencils anymore as I wanted to experiment more with the markers I had bought recently. I tried to blend my Tombow dual brush pens with some water when coloring the moon, but that didn't work out as I ended up having some bleed through and had to glue two pages together before setting up my monthly spread. I'm not a huge fan of this theme, but I don't hate it either as I think it was a good learning experience for me. I used the same decorated layout for the first weeklies of November, but it did end up taking too much time, so I decided to keep the rest of them more simple by adding these stripes behind the numbers. Anyway, next we are moving on to December, and I decided to do a wintry cover page that wouldn't scream Christmas too much. I struggled a little bit with using markers as they leave more streaks behind compared to the colored pencils that I used before, but I did still really like how this cover turned out. I also tried a one-page monthly calendar for the first time, as I didn't have as many things on my to-do list. This month I experimented a little bit more with my weekly spreads and tried out a few different layouts just for a change. As the new year was coming, I wanted to do a yearly review where I wrote down some successes, challenges and things to improve. I also made a little timeline on the bottom where I wrote down some monthly highlights and used a different color for each of them. To the page on the right I made a new goal setting spread, and on the right side I made my first ever quote page. I also decided to try out this monthly challenge spread which I saw on Pinterest. Basically I just had a different challenge for each month, like eating something green every day, and I would color in one square after doing it. As you can see, I was motivated for the first 2 months, but after that the challenges got too complicated or boring, I guess. Anyway, here's my 2019 January cover page. My style again took a little bit of a turn as my boyfriend got me watercolor pencils for Christmas and I really wanted to use them in my journal. This month we were going on a cruise with my friends, so I decided to do a lighthouse/ocean theme and I really liked how it turned out. I did a little planning spread for the trip where I wrote down our schedule and some things to check out in Helsinki and Stockholm, as those were the places where we were going. For February, I decided to draw a bird for my cover, as you can see a lot of these kinds of birds here in Finland during the winter. This was my favorite theme for quite a while, as I was really happy how it turned out, and I also really liked these colors. I noticed that my handwriting had improved a lot, so I was really happy about that too. At this point I had been bullet journaling for over a year and I felt like I was slowly finding my style. Here's my March cover page, and this was actually the month when I started my Tea and Bujo account on Instagram. I felt like I really wanted to share my bullet journal spreads with someone, but didn't want to just send out photos to my friends because that would have felt a bit weird. So I started posting them on Instagram just for fun, and I never thought that someday there would be thousands of people watching my work or that I would have a YouTube channel as well. Anyway, I think it's interesting to see how my bullet journal and style changed after I started sharing photos of my journal online. For example, I started using a slightly different layout for each of my weeklies because it would have felt a little bit pointless if I had shared exactly the same weekly layout over and over again. In April, I was really inspired by people who did drawings with colored pencils, so I drew this bunny on my cover page with them. I think the bunny turned out great, but I didn't pay enough attention to the background and the title, as drawing the bunny took forever, and I guess I got a little bit tired at that point. I did really like how this theme turned out still, and I was very happy with the rest of the pages. For the first time I tried out a different layout for my habit tracker because this one looked a little bit more aesthetic, and I also decided to try out tracking my sleeping hours on the bottom. This was definitely my favorite weekly in this setup, and I remember it got over 100 likes on Instagram too, which I was happy about. For May, I decided to try out something completely different and decided to do this Zentangle theme, which was mainly black and white. I was quite busy with my internship during this time, so I kept the pages more on the simple side. I was also sick during this time because of my endometriosis, which wasn't diagnosed yet, so that probably also affected on my energy levels. By the way, I talk more about my endometriosis story on my March plan with me, so go check that out if you want to know more about that. And if you are someone who menstruates, I would highly recommend checking out that video, as endometriosis is very undiagnosed and can cause a lot of different painful symptoms. In June, I did an amusement park theme because I started a new summer job at a local amusement park, which was definitely the best summer job that I ever had. I made a Ferris wheel mood tracker and used different colors to fill it in, but I think it would have looked a lot better if I had colored in the little knobs instead of the sections, if that makes sense. I didn't use my journal as much this month as I was recovering from the surgery related to my endometriosis, so I set up only the last 3 weekly spreads and kept them very simple. July is my birthday month, and as a Leo, I decided to do a lion theme for my bullet journal. I again used the watercolor pencils as I realized that I preferred that as a medium. I still really like how this cover turned out, and for a long time this was my favorite cover page and theme. I experimented a little bit more with the watercolor style with my happy tracker and did these paw prints on the sides. I really like how this tracker looks filled in, and I still sometimes use this kind of layout as it works really well for me. For August, I did a dragonfly theme with a similar style that I used for my July as well. This cover page wasn't my favorite, but I like this theme otherwise, as I experimented a little bit more with the other spreads, like this monthly spread where I decided to try making individual boxes for the calendar for the first time. This happy tracker spread was definitely my all-time favorite at the time, as I was really happy how it turned out, especially after filling the tracker completely. The dragonfly illustration took forever as the wings had a lot of details in them. I wasn't very motivated to use my weekly spreads as I was already looking forward to setting up my new journal, which I was desperately waiting for to arrive, so I kept my weekly super simple. This was a really special journal for me, and I experimented a lot with my style, but I think the biggest changes happened during the next journal that I used. I was finally able to get my hands on Arthur and Olive journal, and I instantly fell in love with it as the cover was stunning and it also had really thick pages. Because this notebook arrived a little bit later than I hoped, I kept the beginning pages very simple so I can start planning for September as soon as possible. I just had a checklist for my assignments again, and I also did few lists for books, movies and TV shows that I had been watching. I wanted to do a fall theme, so I drew a squirrel and used the same watercolor pencils again, as that was the medium I enjoyed using at the time. I drew something a little bit different in each spread depending on how much time I had for setting up the spreads, and used some fall appropriate colors to keep this theme somewhat cohesive. I still really love the squirrel that I drew on this weekly spread, as I think it turned out a lot better than the one on my cover page because I didn't add as much line work in it. And I also decided to try out this vertical weekly with leaf doodles again, as I thought it would work well with this theme too. For the last weekly spread, I decided to keep things nice and simple because I didn't have as much time to spend on doodling, and I really liked how this weekly turned out. This next theme, which was for October, was my favorite for quite a long time. I was going to travel to New York with my family and wanted to do this city skyline theme, which was heavily inspired by Amanda Rach Lee. For some reason, this theme was a lot more difficult than I first thought, and I struggled a lot with getting the perspectives right. This was probably the first time when I did a very cohesive theme in my bullet journal, and I really liked how it turned out, even though setting up the spreads took quite long. My weekly spreads were also very decorative compared to what I normally did. I wanted to have a little bit more writing space so I can write down some memories from our trip to New York, and because of that I made my second Dutch door ever. At this time I only saw people using Dutch doors as a way to add more writing space in their weeklies, so I didn't do them very often as my weeklies already had enough writing space in them. November is really dark and gloomy month here in Finland, so I thought a lonely wolf illustration would be cool, and I think this turned out great. This was one of the last themes where I used watercolor pencils, as I bought Crayola super tips from New York and wanted to give those a try. I was really busy with my internship this month, so my trackers ended up looking quite empty and I skipped some weekly spreads as well. Here's my December theme, and this is definitely still one of my favorite cover pages, even though it isn't really my style anymore. I just really like the simple design and how I used red as an accent color. I was still busy with my internship, so I decided to try out mini calendars for my Happy Tracker for the first time, but I really missed my old Happy Tracker layout, so I went back to that for next month. As I had a lot of pages left in this journal, I continued using it in 2020 as well. I just set up a goal setting spread in the middle and another monthly challenges spread, which I didn't end up using. For January, I did the simple and quick snowflake theme with Crayola super tips, and I think it turned out really cute. I wanted to make my themes a little bit more cohesive, so I doodled snowflakes in every spread and used blue as my accent color. I also had more time to use my journal, so I changed up my weekly layout for each week and decorated the pages quite a lot. I started taking Instagram a bit more seriously and posted more often, so that's probably why I started paying a little bit more attention to my weekly spreads. I was struggling a little bit with finding the theme for February, so I decided to do a bird theme again. I didn't really know how to execute the idea with markers, so I used watercolor pencils to color in the bird and used a bigger brush pen for the header. I got a little bit bored with drawing just snowflakes in my January setup, so I experimented a bit more with the rest of the setup, and for other bird doodles I decided to use my markers as I wanted to improve my drawing skills with them. The bird doodles were inspired by creators I saw on Pinterest, and I try to link them in the description box if I can still remember them. At this point I started thinking about changing the language in my bullet journal to English so I could reach a little bit wider audience. I thought March would be the perfect month for this experiment as I wanted to raise awareness about endometriosis with my theme. This illustration was inspired by a piece of jewelry I saw on Pinterest, and I thought it would fit this theme as well, as it reminded me of ovaries and uterus, which often get affected if you have endometriosis. This is still a very special theme for me and one of my all-time favorites, as it was a way for me to deal with the emotions I had at the time. I used markers for the illustrations and added gold watercolor on top of them, which looks very beautiful when you flip through the pages. At the beginning of 2020, I actually got my first kind of commission work as one company approached me and wanted me to create a few spreads for them to use on their social media. The style of these spreads was a little bit different compared to my own, but it was a good exercise for me to see if I would enjoy doing commission work. Anyway, we are now at the end of this video, as it would have been way too long if I had included the 2 other journals in it, so stay tuned for part 2. Hope you found some inspiration or new ideas from this video, and remember to leave thumbs up and a bird emoji in the comments if you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye bye!